She was auctioned for being infertile, until a father of 6 made her his world. The auction block stood like a coffin in the blazing noon sun. Clara's hands trembled against her worn cotton dress as the auctioneer's voice boomed across the town square. 3 marriages. 3 failures. 3 times her womb had stayed empty while other women's bellies swelled with life. What am I bid for Clara Henley? The man's voice cracked like a whip. Strong back. Good cook. Clean house. He paused, his eyes cold as winter stones. Barren as a salt flat, but she'll work hard. The crowd shifted in the dust. Women pulled their children closer. Men spat tobacco juice and shook their heads. Clara felt their stares burn hotter than the desert wind. Her first husband had called her cursed. Her second had beaten her for it. Her third had simply walked away one morning, leaving only boot prints in the dirt and a note that cut deeper than any knife. $5. The voice came from somewhere in the back. Clara couldn't see who spoke. Didn't matter. $5 was what they paid for a lame horse. Do I hear 10? The auctioneer wiped sweat from his brow. The silence stretched like a rope about to snap. Somewhere a baby cried. Somewhere a woman whispered prayers. Clara closed her eyes and felt shame pour through her like poison. The church bells had rung her death sentence that morning. Reverend Morrison's words still echoed in her skull. A woman who cannot bear children has no place in God's plan. The elders had nodded. The women had clicked their tongues. And Clara had stood there, empty inside, watching her life crumble like old bread. Going once for $5. The hammer rose like an executioner's axe. That's when she heard it. A voice deep as thunder rolling across the plains. $100. The crowd gasped. Women fanned themselves harder. Men turned to stare. Clara's eyes snapped open, searching the sea of faces for the source of salvation or damnation. She couldn't tell which. $100. The auctioneer's voice cracked with disbelief. Sir, did you say? I said $100. The voice came closer now. Boots stepped through the crowd like a man walking through wheat. Clara saw him then. Tall as a pine tree. Shoulders broad as a barn door. Hat pulled low over eyes the color of storm clouds. Thomas Whitmore. She'd heard the name whispered in the general store. The widower with 6 children and a heart made of stone. Thomas, you gone mad? Someone shouted from the crowd. She's barren. Can't give you more children. Thomas stepped closer to the auction block. His eyes met Clara's for the first time. Something passed between them. Not love. Not yet. But understanding. The kind that grows between 2 broken souls recognizing the cracks in each other. I got all the children I can handle, Thomas said. His voice carried across the square like wind through canyon walls. What I need is someone who won't run when times get hard. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The words hit her like cool water in a drought. Not love. Not promises of babies or wedding rings. Just honest need meeting honest desperation. Going once, going twice, the hammer fell like thunder. Sold to Thomas Whitmore for $100. The crowd began to scatter. Some shook their heads in disgust. Others whispered behind gloved hands. But Clara barely heard them. She was staring at this stranger who just bought her like a piece of farm equipment. Bought her not in spite of her barrenness, but maybe because of it. Thomas walked to the edge of the platform. Up close, she could see the lines carved around his eyes. The gray threading through his dark hair. The calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work and harder losses. You got a choice, he said quietly. Come with me now, or take the money and start somewhere fresh. Either way, you're free of this place. Clara looked past him to the town that had branded her worthless. The women who'd crossed themselves when she walked by. The men who'd looked through her like she was smoke. The children who'd been taught to fear the curse that lived in her empty womb. Then she looked back at Thomas Whitmore. This stranger with storm-cloud eyes and a voice like distant thunder. A man who needed help, not hope. Who wanted work, not miracles. "Your children," she said. Her voice barely a whisper. "Will they accept me?" Something flickered across Thomas's face. Pain, maybe. Or memory sharp as broken glass. "They're scared," he said. "Been without a mother for 2 years. Don't trust easy." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "But they need someone who won't leave them." The church bells rang again. 3 times. Like a death knell or a wedding march. Clara couldn't tell which. But she stepped down from that platform like a woman walking toward her future instead of her grave. The sun beat down merciless as a judge's gavel. Dust swirled around their boots like the ghosts of all her failures. But for the first time in 3 years, Clara Henley felt something stir in her chest that wasn't shame. It wasn't hope yet. Hope was too dangerous for a woman like her. But it was possibility. Small as a seed in drought-hard ground. Fragile as morning frost. But real. Thomas offered his arm. Not like a lover. Like a partner in some desperate bargain with fate itself. Clara took it, feeling the solid warmth of him against her palm. They walked away from that auction block together. 2 broken people carrying their wounds like badges of honor. Behind them, the town settled back into its rhythm of judgment and whispers. Ahead lay a ranch house full of children who didn't know her name and a future written in dust and uncertainty. But Clara didn't look back. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way forever. The wagon wheels groaned like old bones as they rolled up the dirt path to the Whitmore ranch. Clara's first glimpse of her new home hit her like a fist to the chest. The house stood crooked against the dying light, its paint peeled away by desert winds and neglect. Broken shutters hung like wounded wings. The front porch sagged under the weight of 2 years' worth of grief. Thomas pulled the reins tight. The horses snorted and stamped, eager to be free of their burden. But Clara couldn't move. Through dust-streaked windows, she saw shadows moving inside. Small shapes that vanished the moment she looked their way. "They're watching," Thomas said, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Been doing that since their mama died. Hiding. Waiting for the next person to leave them." Clara's throat went dry as old leather. She'd never raised a child. Never even held a baby longer than a church blessing. What did she know about scraped knees and bedtime prayers? What did she know about loving something that could break your heart just by breathing? The front door creaked open. A boy stepped onto the porch. Maybe 14, all sharp elbows and angry eyes. His clothes hung loose on his frame, like he'd grown too fast for the world to keep up. Behind him, Clara caught glimpses of smaller faces peering through the doorway like field mice watching a hawk. "This her?" The boy's voice cut through the evening air. "The barren woman?" Thomas climbed down from the wagon, his boots hitting the ground hard. "Mind your tongue, Samuel." "Why should I?" Samuel stepped closer, his hands balled into fists. "She ain't my mama. Never will be." He spat in the dust between them. "How long before she runs off too? Week? Month?" Clara felt the words slice through her like broken glass. But she'd heard worse. Been called worse. She climbed down from the wagon on shaking legs, her dress catching on the rough wood. The silence stretched between them like a noose waiting to tighten. A little girl appeared in the doorway. Maybe 6 years old, with corn silk hair and eyes wide as a startled deer. She clutched a faceless doll made from flour sacks and string. Behind her, more children emerged from the shadows. 2 boys who looked like twins, maybe 10 years old. Another girl, older, maybe 12, with her mama's ghost living in her face. Children, Thomas said. His voice carried the weight of exhaustion. This is Clara. She's come to help. We don't need help. The older girl stepped forward, her chin raised like she was facing down a rattlesnake. We've been doing fine on our own. Clara looked around the porch. Fine. Dishes stacked in corners, unwashed for days. Clothes hanging on the railings, stiff with dust and sweat. A garden choked with weeds and dying in the heat. This wasn't fine. This was survival. Barely. What's your name? Clara asked the girl, her voice soft as a whisper. Don't matter. The girl's eyes flashed with something fiercer than anger. Fear. You won't be here long enough to remember. The little one with the doll stepped forward. Her bare feet made no sound on the wooden boards. I'm Sarah, she said, her voice small as a sparrow's song. This is Mary. She held up the faceless doll. Mama made her before she went to heaven. Samuel grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her back. Don't talk to her. Don't get attached. His eyes burned when they met Clara's. They all leave. Soon as they figure out what we are. What are you? Clara asked. Cursed. The word came from the older girl. Mama died birthing the baby. Baby died too. Papa works himself to death trying to forget. And we just try to stay alive till the next bad thing happens. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon like an army of dark angels. Clara felt the first drops of rain kiss her face, warm as tears. You hungry? She asked. The children exchanged glances. The twins stepped closer together. Sarah hugged her doll tighter. Even Samuel's anger flickered, just for a moment. There's beans in the kitchen, the older girl said. Been eating beans for 3 days. Clara nodded. She'd expected worse. Beans meant they were trying. Beans meant someone cared enough to keep them fed, even if barely. I can make cornbread, Clara said. If you got cornmeal. We got cornmeal. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. But it's got bugs in it. Bugs wash out. Clara smiled, the first real smile she'd felt in months. My mama taught me that. Before she died. Something shifted in the air between them. Not acceptance. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of possibility. Like the first green shoots pushing through drought-hardened ground. Thomas watched from the wagon, still as a gravestone. Rain began to fall harder, drumming against the roof like fingers tapping out a funeral march. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the broken family standing on that sagging porch. Storm's coming, he said. Clara looked at the children. Really looked at them. Saw the hunger in their faces. The loneliness carved into their bones. The desperate hope they were afraid to feel. Samuel crossed his arms over his chest. You staying for supper don't mean you're staying. No, Clara agreed. It doesn't. She picked up her single carpetbag from the wagon. Everything she owned fit inside. 3 dresses. A Bible her first husband had given her. A photograph of parents she barely remembered. Not much to show for 32 years of living. But I'm staying for supper anyway, she said. Sarah smiled. Just a little. Just enough to crack the armor around Clara's heart. The rain came down harder now, washing the dust from the air and filling the cisterns with something like hope. Clara walked toward the house, toward 6 broken children and a man who'd bought her not for love, but for something more practical. Something that might last. Behind her, thunder rolled across the plains like God's own judgment day. Ahead lay a kitchen full of bugs and beans and the kind of silence that came after everything precious had been buried in the ground. But Clara kept walking. Some storms, she'd learned, you had to walk through to get to the other side. The first Sunday morning came like a reckoning. Clara stood in front of the cracked mirror in Thomas's bedroom, trying to make herself presentable for church. Her reflection stared back, hollow-eyed and haunted. 3 weeks she'd been on the ranch now. 3 weeks of mending clothes and washing dishes and pretending she belonged in this house full of ghosts. Sarah had started following her around like a lost puppy. The twins spoke to her in whispers when their father wasn't watching. Even the older girl, Emma, she'd finally learned, had stopped flinching when Clara brushed past her in the kitchen. But Samuel still watched her with eyes sharp as broken glass, waiting for her to pack her bag and disappear like smoke. "You don't have to come," Thomas said from the doorway. His Sunday suit hung loose on his frame, like he'd shrunk since his wife died. "Town folk ain't been kind about our arrangement." Clara's hand stilled on her hair. "Our arrangement. That's what they called it. Not marriage. Not love. Just a business deal wrapped in Sunday prayers and bitter necessity." "I'm coming," she said. Her voice sounded stronger than she felt. "These children need to see someone standing beside them." The walk to church felt like walking to her own execution. Every step raised dust that clung to her black dress like accusations. The children walked in formation around her, Sarah holding her hand, the twins flanking them like bodyguards, Emma and Samuel trailing behind with faces set hard as stone. The church bells rang across the valley, their sound carried on wind that tasted of dust and judgment. Clara could see the townspeople gathering on the church steps, their Sunday clothes bright as peacock feathers in the morning sun. Conversation stopped when they spotted the Whitmore family approaching. Fans snapped shut. Whispers began to buzz like angry wasps. "There she is," Clara heard Mrs. Henderson say to her daughter. "The barren woman trying to play mother to another woman's babies." "Shameful," came another voice. "Those poor children don't know what confusion she's bringing to their souls." Clara's steps faltered. Sarah's small hand tightened in hers, and Clara realized the little girl had heard too. They all had. Samuel's jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Emma's cheeks flushed red as autumn leaves. "Keep walking," Thomas murmured behind them. "Don't give them the satisfaction." But the voices followed them up the church steps like hounds on a scent. "Playing house with a dead woman's family. Unnatural, that's what it is. Mark my words, those children will be ruined by the time she's done with them." Inside the church, the judgment felt thick as summer heat. Eyes tracked their movement to the family pew. The same pew where Thomas had sat with his first wife, where she'd held babies that grew into these wounded children walking beside Clara now. Reverend Morrison's sermon cut through the air like a blade. "And the Lord said unto the barren woman, Your shame shall be great, for you have not fulfilled your purpose." His eyes found Clara's across the congregation. "But blessed are those who care for the orphaned and the fatherless, even when their own bodies have failed them." Clara felt the words hit her like stones. Around her, the children sat still as carved wood. Sarah's breathing grew quick and shallow. Samuel's hands balled into fists on his knees. They were hearing this too. Learning that their new caretaker was marked by God Himself as flawed. After the service, the real torture began. Women clustered in the churchyard like buzzards around carrion. Their voices carried on the desert wind, each word designed to cut deeper than the last. "Those poor babies need a real mother, not some cast-off woman who can't even do what the Lord intended. It's not natural, I tell you. A barren woman raising children. What kind of example does that set?" Thomas Whitmore's lost his mind with grief. "Mark my words, this will end in tears." Emma stepped closer to Clara, her young face pale as winter sky. "They're talking about us," she whispered. "Let them talk," Clara said, but her voice shook like leaves in a storm. That's when Mrs. Patterson approached, her face pinched with righteousness. "Clara Henley," she said, loud enough for half the congregation to hear. "I hope you know what you're doing to these children. Filling their heads with ideas about family when you can't even be a proper woman yourself." The words hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Clara felt every eye in the churchyard turn toward them. Felt the weight of their judgment pressing down like a physical thing. This was her moment. She could bow her head and accept their condemnation, or she could fight back. "These children have food on their table and clean clothes on their backs," Clara said, her voice carrying across the yard. "They have someone who listens to their prayers and tends their scrapes. If that's not proper womanhood, then maybe your definition needs fixing." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Patterson's face flushed red as a rooster's comb. "Well, no," Clara interrupted. "I don't expect you have." Samuel stared at her with something like wonder in his eyes. Emma's mouth fell open. Even the twins looked impressed. But it was Sarah who moved Clara most. The little girl stepped closer, pressing against Clara's side like she was claiming her ground. "She's our mama now," Sarah said, her voice clear as church bells. "And she makes better cornbread than anybody." The silence that followed stretched like a rope about to snap. Clara felt the town's disapproval washing over them like a dust storm. But she also felt something else. The warm weight of children choosing sides. The solid presence of Thomas behind her, not defending her, but not abandoning her either. Mrs. Patterson sniffed and turned away. "Come along, girls. We don't associate with that sort." The crowd began to disperse, their whispers following them like shadows. But Clara stood her ground, these 6 children arrayed around her like a fortress made of flesh and bone and desperate hope. The walk home felt different. Lighter somehow. Sarah skipped beside her, humming church hymns. The twins argued about who could run faster. Even Samuel's scowl had softened into something like respect. But Clara knew this was only the beginning. The town had made its judgment clear. She was the barren woman who dared to play mother. And they would not let her forget it. The desert wind picked up, carrying dust and the distant sound of train whistles. Change was coming. Clara could feel it in her bones like an old wound before a storm. The fever arrived with the autumn wind, carried on dust and desperation from the railroad camps 50 miles east. Clara first noticed it when Sarah didn't come running for breakfast. The little girl lay curled in her narrow bed, her corn silk hair dark with sweat, her skin burning like a forge in summer. "Sarah, honey." Clara pressed her palm to the child's forehead and jerked it back. The heat coming off her small body could have melted snow. "Thomas." Her voice cracked like a whip across the morning silence. By noon, the twins were down too. By evening, Emma lay shivering under every quilt in the house while her fever climbed higher than a church steeple. Only Samuel remained standing, his 14-year-old body fighting the sickness with the same stubborn fury he'd once aimed at Clara. "It's scarlet fever," Dr. Mason said when he finally arrived from town. His horse was lathered with sweat and exhaustion. Swept through 3 counties already. Nothing to do but wait it out. He looked at Clara with eyes tired as an old preacher's. "Keep them cool. Keep them drinking water. And pray." That's when Clara learned what real fear tasted like. It tasted like copper pennies and dust. It felt like her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. These weren't her children by blood, but somewhere in the past month, they'd become hers in every way that mattered. She sent Thomas to town for supplies. Sent Samuel to the neighbor's ranch where the fever hadn't struck yet. "I won't leave," Samuel said, his young face set hard as granite. "They're my family too." So Clara fought the fever with an army of 2. She and Samuel moved through that house like soldiers in a war zone. Cool water from the well. Clean rags changed every hour. Broth spooned into burning mouths that couldn't keep food down. The first night stretched longer than winter. Clara sat beside Sarah's bed, watching the little girl's chest rise and fall in rhythm with her racing heart. The lamplight flickered across Sarah's face, making her look like a ghost already half gone to the other side. "Mama?" Sarah's voice came out cracked and small. Her eyes opened, but they looked through Clara like she was made of smoke. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Sarah had never called her mama before. Always Clara, or nothing at all. But fever had a way of stripping away pretense, revealing the truth buried deep in a child's heart. "I'm here, baby," Clara whispered, smoothing damp hair away from Sarah's burning forehead. "Mama's here." She sang then. Songs her own mother had hummed while hanging laundry in the desert wind. Lullabies she'd never had reason to learn but somehow remembered anyway. Her voice rose and fell in the lamplight, weaving a cocoon of sound around a dying child. The second day brought worse news. Emma's fever spiked so high she started talking to people who weren't there. The twins lay still as dolls, their breathing shallow as morning mist. Clara moved between their beds like a woman possessed, her hands never still, her prayers never stopping. Thomas tried to help when he returned from town, but exhaustion had carved hollows under his eyes. "You need sleep," he said, watching Clara change another sweat-soaked sheet. "I'll sleep when they're better," she said. But her voice shook like leaves in a storm. How many children could one woman lose before her heart just stopped working altogether? The third night, Emma started convulsing. Her small body arched off the bed like she was trying to fly away from the pain. Clara held her down, her own tears mixing with the child's sweat. "Don't leave me," she whispered. "Please don't leave me." That's when she understood the cruel mathematics of motherhood. Love didn't care about blood or biology. It grew wild and fierce and desperate, taking root in the most unexpected soil. Clara would have traded her own life for any one of these children without thinking twice. Samuel collapsed on the fourth day. The fever took him down like a felled tree, his stubborn strength finally meeting something stronger. Clara dragged his burning body to the last clean bed and started the routine all over again. Cool rags. Fresh water. Whispered prayers that felt like throwing stones into a bottomless well. Clara's world had shrunk to the size of these 4 beds and the space between them. Her feet knew every creaking board by heart. Her hands moved by instinct, checking foreheads, adjusting blankets, spooning water between burning lips. The 5th day dawned gray as old bones. Clara stood at the window, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. Her reflection stared back from the glass, a woman she barely recognized. Her hair hung loose and tangled. Her dress was stained with sweat and medicine and tears. She looked like she'd been wrestling with death itself. And maybe she had been. That's when she heard it. A sound that stopped her heart cold. Silence. Not the restless stirring of fever dreams, but complete, absolute quiet from Sarah's bed. Clara's legs moved before her mind could catch up. She crossed the room in 3 steps, her breath trapped somewhere between her lungs and her throat. Sarah lay perfectly still, her small face pale as morning frost. "No." The word came out broken, torn from someplace deep in Clara's chest. "No, no, no." She pressed her ear to Sarah's chest, listening for the flutter of a heartbeat that would mean the world hadn't ended. There. Faint as whispered prayer, but steady. Sarah's heart beating against her ribs like a caged bird. The fever had broken. The crisis had passed. Clara's knees gave out. She sank beside the bed, her body shaking with relief so intense it felt like drowning in reverse. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, clear blue as summer sky for the first time in 5 days. "Mama?" Sarah's voice came out cracked but real. "I'm thirsty." Clara laughed through her tears, the sound strange and wild in the quiet room. "Of course you are, baby. Of course you are." One by one, the others followed. Emma's fever broke that evening, leaving her weak but aware. The twins woke together the next morning, asking for breakfast in voices hoarse as old men's. Samuel took another day, fighting the sickness with the same stubborn pride he brought to everything else. By the end of the week, all 5 children sat around the kitchen table, pale and thin but alive. They ate Clara's soup with the concentration of people who'd looked death in the face and lived to tell about it. The silence between them felt different now. Not empty, but full. Rich as soil after rain. "You stayed," Samuel said suddenly. His voice cracked on the words, caught somewhere between boy and man. "When we were dying, you stayed." Clara looked up from her own bowl. All 5 children were staring at her with something she'd never seen before. Not gratitude, exactly. Something deeper. Something that looked almost like worship. "Where else would I go?" she asked. "Mama would have stayed too," Emma said quietly. For the first time, she wasn't comparing Clara to a ghost. She was accepting her as something real. That night, after the children were asleep and Thomas had returned from checking the cattle, Clara found herself in the kitchen garden. The tomatoes had withered during her week-long vigil. The beans hung dry on their stalks. Everything she'd planted had died while she fought to keep something more precious alive. Thomas found her there, kneeling in the dirt between the ruined rows. "Clara?" She looked up at him through tears that felt different from any she'd cried before. Not tears of sorrow or shame, but something else entirely. Something that felt like being born. "I understand now," she said. "What it means to be a mother." Thomas knelt beside her in the dirt. His calloused hands covered hers, warm and solid as bedrock. "You saved them," he said. "All of them." Clara shook her head. "They saved me." The truth of it hit her like lightning splitting the sky. "I've been empty my whole life, thinking it was because my womb wouldn't grow babies. But it wasn't that kind of empty." She gestured toward the house where 5 children slept safe in their beds, their fevers gone, their nightmares held at bay by the knowledge that someone would always be there when they woke. "I was empty because I'd never loved anything more than my own life," she said. "Never had anything worth dying for." Thunder rumbled overhead. The first drops of rain began to fall, warm and sweet as a benediction. Clara tilted her face toward the sky, feeling the water wash away 5 days of fear and exhaustion and desperate prayer. "Those children in there," she whispered. "They're mine now. Not because I bore them, but because I almost lost them." Thomas helped her to her feet. Together they stood in the growing storm, 2 broken people who'd found something worth mending for. The rain came harder, soaking through their clothes, filling the air with the smell of wet earth and new beginnings. Inside the house, Sarah called out in her sleep. Not a fever dream this time, but the simple restlessness of a child having regular nightmares about regular things. Clara smiled, wiping rain from her face. "Mama's coming," she called softly. And for the first time in her life, the word felt like it belonged to her. 3 years had passed since the fever nearly claimed them all. 3 years of drought that cracked the earth like broken promises and left the sky empty of everything but dust and disappointment. Clara stood in her kitchen garden, watching the last of her tomatoes shrivel in the merciless heat. The well had gone dry 2 weeks ago. The cattle moved like ghosts across pastures that looked more like moonscape than grazing land. Thomas spent his days riding fence lines, searching for grass that didn't exist and water that had fled deeper into the earth than any shovel could reach. But this morning felt different. Clara couldn't name why, but something had shifted in the air like the moment before lightning strikes. She was pulling weeds from around the dying bean plants when she heard Sarah's voice behind her. "Mama? Can you braid my hair for school?" Clara's hands stilled in the dirt. Sarah had called her mama that fever-sick night 3 years ago, but it had taken months for the word to stick. Now it fell from the girl's lips as natural as breathing, but it still sent warmth spreading through Clara's chest like honey in winter. "Course I can, baby. Clara brushed soil from her palms and turned to face her youngest. Sarah stood in the kitchen doorway, 9 years old now and growing like a sunflower reaching for light. Her corn silk hair caught the morning sun, and her eyes held the kind of trust that could break a person's heart with its purity. Inside the kitchen, the morning chaos had already begun. Emma, 15 now and beautiful in that way that made young men stutter, was helping the twins pack their school lunches. Samuel, 17 and tall as his father, was mending a bridle at the kitchen table. All of them moving around each other in the choreography of family life. Clara had learned to love this chaos. The way voices overlapped and argued and laughed all at once. The way small hands reached for things on high shelves and trusted she'd be there to help. The way her name could be called from 6 different directions and she'd somehow know exactly who needed her most. Mrs. Peterson says her chickens ain't laying because of the drought, Emma said, not looking up from the sandwiches she was wrapping in brown paper. Says it's God's judgment on the whole valley. Mrs. Peterson says a lot of things, Clara replied, working her fingers through Sarah's tangled hair. Most of them ain't worth the breath it takes to speak them. Samuel looked up from his leather work, grinning. Remember when she told everyone you'd cursed the crops by being here? Clara remembered. That was 2 summers ago, when the corn had failed and people needed someone to blame. Mrs. Peterson had stood on the church steps, pointing fingers and declaring Clara's barrenness a plague on the whole community. Then the next year we had the best harvest in 10 years, Emma added with satisfaction. Shut her mouth right quick. Emma Rose Whitmore, Clara said, but she was smiling. Mind your tongue about your elders. The girl had taken Clara's last name without ceremony or legal papers. They all had, one by one, until the Henley name was buried as deep as her first 3 marriages. Clara Whitmore. It fit her like clothes made for her body instead of borrowed from someone else's life. I need to ride into town for supplies, Thomas said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with his hat already in his hands. Banks calling in the note on the north pasture. Clara's fingers stilled in Sarah's hair. The north pasture was their best land, the only section that might survive another year of drought. If they lost it, they'd lose everything else like dominoes falling in a line. How much? She asked quietly. More than we got. Thomas's voice carried the weight of a man watching his world crumble. Might be time to think about selling out. Moving to California where there's still water. The silence that followed hit the kitchen like a physical thing. Sarah went rigid under Clara's hands. The twins stopped arguing about their lunch. Samuel set down his bridal work and stared at his father with eyes that held too much understanding for 17 years. No. The word came out of Clara's mouth before she'd planned to speak. All 6 faces turned toward her with expressions ranging from surprise to hope to desperate relief. Clara, Thomas said gently. We can't make water fall from an empty sky. Maybe not, Clara said. She finished Sarah's braid and tied it with a blue ribbon that matched her eyes. But we can dig deeper wells. Plant crops that don't need as much water. Sell cattle we can't feed and buy sheep that can graze on scrub. That could take years, Thomas said. Years we might not have. Clara looked around the kitchen at these 6 people who'd become her whole world. Sarah with her trusting eyes and gentle heart. Emma growing into a woman who'd learned strength from watching loss. The twins who still needed someone to believe in their dreams. Samuel who'd finally stopped waiting for her to leave. And Thomas. The man who'd bought her not for love but for necessity and somehow given her both. Then we'll take it one day at a time, Clara said. Same as we always have. She walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the dying garden and the drought-stricken land beyond. But she wasn't seeing the failure. She was seeing possibility. Root vegetables that could grow in shade. Herbs that thrived in dry soil. A family that had survived fever and drought and the scorn of an entire town. This is our home, she said. Her voice carried across the kitchen like a prayer or a promise. These children have already lost one mother to death. They're not losing another one to fear. Sarah slipped her small hand into Clara's. You won't leave us, will you, Mama? Clara looked down at the girl who'd first called her mother in a fever dream and made the name real through daily repetition. Love swelled in her chest like rain clouds gathering on a parched horizon. Baby, she said, her voice thick with emotion that had no name. I couldn't leave you if I tried. You're all part of me now. In here. She pressed her free hand to her heart. Where it counts. Emma came to stand beside them at the window. Then the twins. Then Samuel, towering over them all but still her boy when the world got too heavy. Finally Thomas, his arms sliding around Clara's waist like he was anchoring himself to something solid. They stood there in the morning light, 7 souls pressed together against whatever storms might come. Outside, the drought continued. The bank still wanted its money. The neighbors still whispered about the barren woman who'd stolen another woman's family. But inside that kitchen, Clara Whitmore had everything she'd ever dreamed of and more than she'd ever dared pray for. A family grown not in her womb but in her heart. Children who called her name when they were scared and ran to her arms when they were hurt. Love that bloomed in the most unlikely soil of all. Come on, she said, stepping back from the window. You'll be late for school. And I've got work to do. There was always work to do. Clothes to mend and meals to cook and scraped knees to kiss better. The daily miracles of motherhood that had nothing to do with giving birth and everything to do with showing up, day after day, year after year. Clara had been empty for 32 years. But she hadn't been barren. She'd just been waiting for the right seeds to plant in the right soil. And now she was growing a garden that would last forever.